Welcome. Thank you for joining our panel discussion this morning. You know, we're at the epicenter of innovation, aren't we? I mean, the past couple of days here at CES has just been extraordinary. I've seen some things that I never expected to run into. I was telling some of my colleagues here about this, the singing toothbrush, the robot companion for my pet. I've seen tires for my moon buggy that I didn't know I needed. I have seen innovation in this room, which is pretty extraordinary with the brain gym and some of the other things. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend a few minutes with this panel, myself moderating, to talk a little bit about how do companies spark innovation in their organization, how do they create an innovation culture, and how do they keep it going. And I think this will be a really engaging thing. Now, I wanted to do this panel for one reason. Every time I go to visit a client, they always ask me, how do I do innovation better? So now I finally get an opportunity to ask my clients, who I also admire their innovation capabilities, some of the same questions that they ask me. Now, we'll go ahead and get started here in just a second, but I thought I would also say one thing. That I've always been a fan of Henry Ford, and he said, you know, if I asked my customers what they wanted, I'd be making faster horses. And my belief is that there's some truth in that. Not entirely true, but there's some truth in that. But it's up to us as enterprises and organizations to be thinking ahead of the curve about what's important for our customers, our business partners, and our employees. And I've assembled a crew here to talk us through how do they develop and foster innovation in these types of environments. We'll start off with a quick introduction. I'm Adam Burden. I'm the global lead for innovation here at Accenture. And my job is to oversee all of our research and development and incubation efforts for new services that we offer to clients. And Chris and Kevin will introduce themselves. Kevin, you go first.
Yeah. So Kevin Rhatigan with Comcast. I'm the VP of Growth Experience Technologies, which essentially is just a fancy way of saying I have delivery of all the platforms from marketing through sales, ordering, ultimately to when you tune in or activate your voicemail. So all of those products across the board.
So Chris Helsel, Senior Vice President, Global Operations, Chief Technology Officer, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. So as you might imagine, we use really small font on our business cards. But it's really a three-part job. Number one is you think of operations. It is what you traditionally think about, procurement, quality, manufacturing. The second part is development of tires, tire technology, tire products. And then the third is actually an interesting area is where we're doing our digital development for intelligence in tires. And even there, we do our business model incubation. So,
awesome.
Awesome.
Mary?
And hi, everyone. Mary Hamilton. I'm going to be innovative and skip the title. My job is really to just bring the best of our innovation capabilities, so a lot of what you see here, to our clients, especially here in North America.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to give everyone a 30-second question to get things kicked off before we get into the core of this. What technology excites you most in terms of its capabilities and likelihood that it's going to create disruption in your industry, or even personally that it makes a difference for you? Is there a technology you look at and say, that's just amazing? Kevin?
Yeah, so that's a great one. For me, it's AR, VR. And when I especially look at sort of like from our industry, both combining connectivity and entertainment, but more importantly, commerce, it truly is when it's starting to become to life sort of the blending of all those experiences, and it just opens up the world to a lot of experiences. Personally, like I am not a good shopper, so I need to make commerce a social experience. I am actually not allowed to pick out my own clothes, luckily. So it is great that with AR, VR, I can start to actually have my wife and daughter give me advice as I'm going through, even sitting in my living room. So it's that's really excited me from going forward.
Awesome. Chris?
I'd highlight high-performance computing. And I have an opportunity to be on the industry board for the exascale computing. And actually, the United States labs, national laboratories, have all come together, and they've established the first exascale computer in Chicago, in Argonne. And to geek out a little bit, that means you can do 2 billion calculations per second. What it really means is we could really get after like things like modeling weather, climate change, new drug discoveries, and relevant to us as new materials.
Extraordinary. Mary?
I'm going to go with material science, which was actually my degree in college, and I never thought I'd get back to using it. But just being able to sort of programmatically at the molecular level be able to create actuators and sensors within materials. So we're talking about one of our trends in the body's electronic. Think about all the materials that we wear. How can those sense and actually help us on a day-to-day basis?
Well, you won't be surprised that I won't be able to resist myself to tell you the one that excites me the most. And actually, artificial intelligence all being around us and stuff, yes, it excites all of us. But for me, it's actually battery chemistry. I think that our world is in desperate need of better ways to store energy. Unfortunately, the times when we need electricity the most is when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, right? And we need a really efficient way to store energy for all of these amazing electric cars. It's not sustainable what we're doing right now. And here at CES, I've seen some really crazy breakthroughs in crystal battery architectures that charge almost instantly and can preserve, have an energy density much higher. And I think it's going to make a huge difference for all of us in the future.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I remember in college, in my material science classes, them saying battery tech is the hardest thing, and that's going to be.
Well, it's here in front of us. Well, so you heard about some of our enthusiasm for the things that we do. Let's talk about how do we inject some of the enthusiasm into our own organizations. I'm going to begin with a question for our panel here, which says, how do you foster a culture of innovation at your company? So maybe, Kevin, you could tell us how you do that at Comcast.
Comcast, yeah. So it really is, I would say, an investment. It's really, you have to set aside capacity. I mean, how many times have we seen sort of we'll get the 1 through N list of these are the 50 critical projects we must deliver. Oh, by the way, we got to cut cost X%. Oh, yeah, and by the way, innovate. And that's really what we want. And at that point, I want to innovate the list and how we do the intakes. But I look at it as sort of, one, setting aside the capacity. You need to free up the resources so you're serious about it. You need to give them, in our case, we give free space. We have lab weeks. We do tech innovation. We're able to, fortunately, with Accenture, they use the garage as often as possible as well. And then finally, I would say, though, it's more encouragement. It's funny when you just give people permission to innovate, how much they embrace it and just start coming up with stuff. Yeah. And then I would say it's more just giving permission more than just the idea of people. I personally have had a lot of folks that come into my team that I want to be a part of Tech Lab Week, but I don't have an idea. And it's really important to make sure that people understand that innovation is taking the idea to life, and you can be part of the team. So we actually would do like a whole, almost like an auction, if you will, a draft. Someone may have an idea, and then they get to draft from the rest of the org of who they want to work on that project for that particular week. So it's really more, I would say, freeing up the space, giving them the tools they need, and then more importantly, just encouraging and giving them that permission.
That's awesome. What do you think, Chris?
One thing I've used with our organization, because I think we all have a tendency to have strong marketing teams and things, and maybe back to your Henry Ford, where they're going to ask your R&D organization, give me just 5% better this. And so what we did was put something in called bold goals. And what they were was, geez, if we can envision we had such a capability, and one of them is change to all renewable materials by 2030, just as one example. And the organization immediately says, well, we don't know how to do that. And we said, well, yeah, exactly. You have to go out and partner with people, find new solutions. Just pedaling faster at what we do isn't going to get us there. So it really forces heads up. Secondly, though, is immediately, well, we can never do that. So you're going to have to convert them to optimists. And that's really come from, well, just tell me what would have to be true. Don't tell me why you can't do it. What would have to happen? And then when they know, and then you say, well, let's go do that. Go ahead, go work on that. And then they're like, yeah, but you won't give me the money, so you better give them the money. Okay? Because otherwise then they say, oh, you just pulled the rug out from under me, and you're not going to support me anyway. So those have been kind of 3 basic steps, I think, that really gets things moving.
Great. Mary?
Yeah, so I would say, with Accenture, we're quite a large company, over 700,000 people. So, we want innovation everywhere, right? Every touch point with our client, that's really important. But we also want to be center-led through that innovation, right? We want to have a focus and a drive. And I think it's really about balancing. We're so fortunate at having all these touch points with so many amazing clients, so much industry knowledge, we can really understand what are all the challenges and problems that are out there in the world.
Yeah.
So you can be very, problem challenge led in our innovation, but at the same time, sometimes the solutions to problems and challenges maybe aren't that, they're incremental, right? But if you're center-led, we're also pushing and driving that innovation as well. So I think for us, it's a really interesting marriage of understanding the problems and challenges that are out in the world and facing our clients, but then bringing this focus of what is coming and understanding what's here at CES and the best thinkers at universities and within our, our innovation org, and then matching those up and pushing it back out.
Yeah. I agree with you, of course, because you and I are in the same innovation organization. I also think that it's important having a culture of innovation, thinking about that failure is success to a degree. It's okay when you get something wrong. Just fail fast, right?
Yeah.
And understand that you're going to learn something from it and move on afterwards. To me is something that's guided me a lot because it feels like I fail a lot. So that's good because I recognize it and I change what I'm doing and move forward into trying something different. Let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about a specific disruptive technology. You told me something that maybe personally impacts you or your company already, but in what ways do you see a disruptive tech or a series of technologies as instrumental to the success of your company? So is there something out there you've observed at CES? Maybe there's a technology on the horizon, something with quantum, maybe a new change in AR, VR, Kevin, that you feel like this is just going to fundamentally change the way that we operate, and it's going to introduce new sources of revenue or allow us to move into an adjacent field. Love to hear what you have.
Yeah. So starting with sort of leaning on with, there's really a combination of both AR, VR with the combination of Gen AI. The main thing is if you think about it, certainly from an entertainment perspective, sports and live sports and how with AR, VR that becomes a completely immersive experience. It really opens up a lot of the perspectives. I would say the other one that I'm really excited about with really sort of leaning on the Gen AI is we mentioned sort of the cost of innovation, and it is an investment. With the Gen AI, it allows us to really sort of put into more hands the ability to quickly take an idea and either fail fast or innovate and bring it to market without the need to have a whole infrastructure. And so it's also sort of exciting when I look at that Gen AI, if I think about where certainly from my perspective, with this industry is changing so quickly, is sort of the fact that everybody will ultimately become agile in a way. It used to be sort of like, oh, that's what tech guys do because they don't like to plan. And ultimately, the ability to be able to go quickly with Gen AI from ideation all the way through the market in a matter of, in some cases, days. I mean, we're going to be marketing shows that never existed until somebody walked in. We recognized that they liked that particular combination. And so that's just exciting when I think about the pace of change in this org and everywhere else from Gen AI.
Do you attribute generative AI in combination with AR, VR, you think that it's going to really accelerate your ability to take advantage of it then? Yeah.
I think it's going to, it worries me tremendously because what it really allows us to do is strategically, I got to look at my roadmap, and all of our platforms are not necessarily scaled out to be able to handle the notion that we're good at sort of like generating content. And in AR, VR, that has been through a development, but it could be the case that we just launch a show or a new sports, a live event, all of that comes together in a matter of seconds in the future.
Yeah, we've made some similar observations, Mary, and some of our own R&D, around this combinatorial impact of certain technologies, certain disruptive tech, that they feed off of each other and then accelerate even more. Love to hear what's got yourself excited there at Goodyear, Chris.
Well, maybe I'll keep going with the thread on high-performance computing because, we think about development of new products, and with the disruption in mobility, we all just need to learn to work completely different. Huge investments are needed to move to electric, to move to autonomy, and the only way you're going to get to those is find ways to do your core work so much better. And so, we've had a 30-year journey with Sandia National Laboratories building out tools to where we don't have to build and test tires. And not having to build and test has huge implications across the corporation. Number one is speed to market. We could get to market in 50% of the time. We spend half as much on development of these products. And just on software and the cost of the same licenses, we've saved $300 million just over the time of our relationship. So where does that money go? Well, that same simulation capability produces a lot of data. And who needs a lot of data? People building out algorithms and the things we're doing for tire intelligence and now connecting those into an intelligent braking system and hopefully making the world a little safer for people to drive and move around. So it's almost a flywheel, that you get something, technology like this, and you don't maybe understand exactly what it can do, but once you start doing it, yes, it saves you dollars on development, but here it's enabling a whole lot of other things for us. So I'd still stay with that one.
All right, awesome. Mary, what do you think?
Well, I mean, look, we're a people business, so I think some of the technologies that we've seen are highly relevant. Generative AI, we're already experimenting with one of our invested partners, Writer, figure out how to use generative AI in our marketing materials. And so it's about, how can we create more, better content, right? Our marketers are, just take, for example, the tech vision, right? Hey, we need an imagery that looks like this or like this, and for this particular asset, and being able to get those more quickly, right, at their fingertips. I think that just leads a lot of value. But I'm going to cheat and I'll kind of add too. I think some of the neuroscience of really understanding wellness and well-being and stressors and where our people are and when they're focused, when they're concentrating, when they're in the flow, and when they're not, when they're challenged. And especially in some areas of our consultancy, making sure our people are healthy and doing well and at their peak performance.
Yep. So I think the other, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our technology vision to an extent that launched this week. And, there's a collection of technologies that make that possible. So our theme this year around human by design, I think introduces new possibilities in every industry, in every government otherwise. And it's about how artificial intelligence and especially generative AI is making technology more accessible than ever. And that democratization is going to amplify the capabilities of people. The impact on productivity is undeniable, but in our business, the four of us, we really care about innovation, right? And I find that the Gen AI tools and this human by design concept, it makes me more creative. It makes me think about things that I hadn't expected and sparks new imagination. And that amplification possibility is really pretty remarkable. Now, we should be able to come up with our own ideas too, though. Let's not forget that. But I'll just give you one example. I was working with a tool set that we've been building that helps us write software, custom software faster. And I had asked it. I said, I'd like you to help me add a wish list feature into this e-commerce software. And I kind of knew what I wanted it to do, but I wanted some help to write the code and the epics and user stories and other things. And it came up with this whole thread around sharing my wish list out on social media so that people could buy me gifts, right? I'm like, I didn't even think about that. But that's where I think that this creativity is really, I got a couple people laughing that's a pretty good idea, actually. But in all seriousness, I think this concept of amplification of people, that really, it changes the ability of us to be more creative and more innovative for our clients, and for ourselves as well. So.
Yeah, and I think it challenges us when you have more bandwidth, might help to be creative. We were doing some stuff here up on the view screen where we were generating shoe design ideas. And actually the inputs to those, I started to think, oh gosh, I can be more creative in the inputs that I'm even giving it because it can come up with crazy stuff, right? So it challenges us to be more creative in that way too.
We're in a world where I think every industry is being disruptive in massive ways. My twin brother works in the legal industry, and generative AI is completely changing how they do their work. When I think about the industry, for example, Chris, that you're in, flying cars. I mean, could have an impact at some point, I guess, on the people's need for tires. But in Comcast, certainly, you know, the impact of regulation, the unbundling of services, people wanting to stream things on their devices as opposed to fixed line TVs. I mean, we're seeing this everywhere, and I think that it's. You know, this is in our hands, right? We're supposed to be, we're the innovative ones that are going to invent the future of tomorrow. So the question here is, how does innovation play a pivotal role in the future of your industries? And you might think about something like more broadly, like the industry in general, or for your particular company in order to respond to this. But I look at this area as, you know, this is in our parts of the organization where we're the center, the core of innovation of our companies. And our leadership is looking at us and saying, how are you going to reinvent tomorrow for us to continue to thrive and to, you know, to deliver on the promises to our shareholders and our employees and others? Now, there's a lot of weight on our shoulders. So go ahead, Kevin. I'd love to hear what you guys have planned in your industry in CMT.
So now you know what's keeping me up at night is exactly that question. So it's like I said, I think we're all learning as we go in a lot of cases here as we innovate. I look at it sort of like twofold. When you look at sort of like just sports and streaming, how much that's different going to be from today. You tune into, like you said, you stream on a program. It could be in the future you're streaming on the program. You have a game where you're actually going live stream because you can play the players. Certainly we have all the aspects of merchandising. You love the jersey. I want to click it. All of that is coming together. Today in our industry, a lot of those are sort of like discrete work streams, and now we have to bring them all together into one experience. And that alone just means our platforms have to be able to adapt to the total change in the market. We used to be able to have months of advance notice on, like, you know, as a deal or what we're going to do. Now you potentially have weeks, days, if not from how everyone else is reacting. And where I think we try to foster it the most, as we know we're going to sort of stumble and figure it out as we go together, is within our culture of innovation, making sure that everyone sort of embraces that notion of change. And you got to get comfortable that what's happening today is going to change tomorrow. And a lot of people like myself get excited about that and lean in. But it's really sort of making sure that we have both the platforms that can expect change. Yep. And that includes scaling and everything else. But that's the biggest ones because we are very much discrete. And we have to be able to build a platform that we don't know how it's going to be used in a year from now even.
I like that. So it's about building for change almost. That's really great. You know, I'd like to believe that we've done some similar things at Accenture and other places, and also for our clients that we build software and business systems and others when we deploy them in this way. But boy, it's an expensive proposition sometimes to do that. So there's a real balance there. So, Chris, what global challenge is Goodyear tackling and helping in the industry that you're operating or you're working in?
I'd probably start with, you know, we all have a big competition for talent, and making jobs better for your talent creates a lot of good things, right? Mm-hmm. Not only for your corporation, your bottom line, but you know, obviously, people engagement, that whole social aspect of sustainability. So I'll start with that one. And so you think of your Gen AI, and we've done some work here, and I think it's really about get people more time to do the satisfying part of the job. So we took all our documents, you know, of all our years, 125 years. So we have a lot of documents, and materials is our core. And so we took all of that information. We presented all of those documents into the capability, and lo and behold, now, you know, you could be a brand new out of university chemical engineer and have access to a lot of the learnings like this of somebody who's been there 35 years. Yeah. And so you don't start them out doing very basic work. They get to start out right on some of your cutting edge stuff. And so, you know, you make those jobs more satisfying. It's efficiency, but boy, you know, people are really engaged, and I think that all of us want, you know, our folks when they come in to go home and know they won, right? And that's from doing satisfying work. The second thing is, maybe I'll just keep going with the sustainability. You know, I mean, all of us have a challenge, whether it's the materials you're using. We're a heavy materials user. And many of the source of those materials have been petrochemicals, right? And so we're doing a big transformation on this and using these technologies to do that discovery and what are options for us. And again, you get those people much more efficient. They have time now to really go after those challenges, because you still have to keep your products of today, top notch. I think that the sustainability really pulls on a lot of these technologies, and will benefit our ability to make the progress we need to make.
Awesome. So, Mary, our industry is a little bit different,
Yeah.
right, than the products industries and
Yes.
the communications and high-tech industry. What things out there are we working on?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. I mean, again, we're a people business. I think there's an element of time and space and place that we deal with, right? How do we engage with our clients? How do we be on site? How do we understand and work with teams? I think some of the technologies around metaverse and spatial compute can help with that, although there's still no replacement for being, we've all seen it, right? Being here face to face. But how do we get the right blend and also think about the environment and, as we're flying back and forth, so how do we find the right balance of how we work? I think there's also going to be whole new job sets and types of work that we do. Obviously with generative AI, the role of prompt engineer never crossed anyone's radar until the last year, and now it's a workforce that we're already building and rapidly growing, and what that skill set's going to look like to maintain code that might not be definitive, right? Code might be ever evolving. That might be a whole nother set of roles and way in which we work. And then to your point, how do we maximize talent? I've never seen anyone that had a to-do list, right, or a set of things that they're doing that they were able to get through everything, right? This stuff should make us more efficient, should make us be able to do more with the people that we have.
So, Mary, you don't get through your to-do list every day? I'm just making some notes here. Thank you.
No, I get the important things done.
I have to add to that just a little is that we look at the services that we do in the consulting industry all the time and say, well, which of these are likely to be subject to automation, or should we be disrupting ourselves around or cannibalizing our own work around, and where should we be expanding and creating new capabilities? And probably many folks in here, maybe my panel, is not aware. You're like, so we're getting into the science tech space, space tech, and others. Like, what can we do in microgravity that would be helpful and interesting to our clients? Is this an area of business that we should be in? So we'll do experiments in things like this and say, is this a viable business for us to be part of? Is this a good thing for us to participate in? And then bring some of those ideas and innovate with our clients. And I think that's I don't know, bold and unique to a degree. And it's also really amazing that we get opportunities to think about that. Like, what are we going to do to invent tomorrow to a degree?
And I think the hardest part of that is the timing. Getting the timing
Picking,
right of when that business is going to.
We always overestimate when it's going to become important and underestimate just how big of an impact it actually is. Okay, audience, get prepared. If you have a question or two, we're more than able and willing to pass some of those questions on to our panelists here. Or if you have a question of me, I'm happy to try and respond to it as well. I did have a question for this group because it's something that's always on our minds here at Accenture. We kind of feel like the pace of change will never be as slow again as it is right now, and staying on top of things is really hard. And my people always ask me, Adam, how do you stay on top of the technology trends that are out there, and what are the things that you read? And by the way, if I pay one of you, will you say, I just read your Tech Vision report, please? But how do you stay on top of technology trends and the things that are out there and important to your business? Like, what is it that you stay in touch with and makes you as a great innovator for your company? Is there something that helps you?
Yeah, besides the Tech Vision report.
Besides the Tech Vision report, okay. $1 to Kevin.
I mean, obviously a lot of it is conferences like this. I would say we've also started within certainly the industry and Comcast especially, opening up more forums just to have discussion. To your earlier point, there's so much happening, it's almost impossible for an individual to keep up to it. So, but if you get sort of like that collegial atmosphere, if you will, of people sharing, you're able to at least get sort of the hints, and then you can go, okay, let me go deep on that one. But it really is looking at across all the tech trends. ChatGPT is huge about that, and just more. I would say it used to be that I would research to get the latest trends.
Yep.
Now it's more, I try to get together in a social event with as many people as I can to start to hear what they're researching, if you will, because maybe if I get enough people together, we can come up with a little bit of the broad aspects of what's out there. Just so much is happening so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea too. Like, I don't find that a lot of innovation comes from text messages and emails. It's when you get people talking. Mm-hmm. When I have a crazy idea and I get a couple people together and say, okay, I have something a little nutty. I just want to run it by folks and let me know what you think. That's where things really get interesting, right?
And then Adam expects them to already be built.
Mary's like, yeah,
so it should be done.
Mary's like, this happens a lot. So, Chris, what
Well,
NetSpace
I'll
for you?
tell you, I don't. It's impossible for me to keep on top of all these tech trends. Some of my teams here, they may say, "Oh my God, yeah, he's really good at this." Is I ask them a lot of questions. I'll be like, "Jenny, what the heck does that mean to us?" And then somebody gets homework, and luckily they have the talent to go get that done. So, I think as a leader, you just have to be pretty darn inquisitive. Right? And so always be reading or interacting and then just come back with good questions. But make no mistake, it's the talent in your organization that's really going to go figure out what it means to us. You're not going to do that from the C-suite, okay? At least I can't. But one experience we had is really build a network. And I'll just give you this quick journey. It was only 5 years ago. We came to CES for the first time as Goodyear, saying, oh my gosh, these mobility trends are coming. What the heck are we going to do? And we at least knew what the trends were. Okay. From there, we put 2 people in San Francisco with no office and just said, go meet people. Tell us what this means to us. Those people right now lead a 50-person digital development center that we never had an idea that we would do or need. And what do they do in there is they pursue these technologies and they bring them to life, but they don't just do it on their own. They're doing it with partners they meet. And how are they doing that? They go to the networking events. They have the meetings. They get together, whether it's an event like this or it's something just, hey, let's go have lunch and have those collisions. So I think the network would be the thing I'd add. Make sure you get a lot of network work going on around this technology.
All right, my answer's similar, but I was going to say all the incredibly smart people that I get to interact with on a regular basis. I mean, my researchers, you go and talk to any of them, you're just blown away at the depth and the brilliance that they come up with. But then it's about connecting the dots, right? So for me, it's talking to our clients, talking to our industry leadership, talking to our researchers, talking to researchers at universities, talking to other research labs, and then it's like, okay, wait, if we put that and that and that together, if we put the brain gym together with the Lamborghini telemetrics, then wait a minute, and then, put a knowledge graph on top of that, or, training, putting the pieces together and then kind of testing it out with other smart people who have the business challenges, and that's where I think you start to see the trends. So, I feel very fortunate that I get to interact with a lot of clients, so you kind of get this bubbling up of, all right, what's coming to the top, right? Yeah.
The pace of change, though, is something that's just extraordinary. It's a fire hose, right, every day.
Yes.
And I think it's that we democratize the ability to be innovative in Accenture, and we provide people the pathways to come and share the things that they're doing and they get excited about. That's what I think sparks innovation in our cases. One example that I love, one of my favorite things the labs is working on is this experiment they're doing called brain to image. And I showed a little demo of it yesterday to just a small group, and they were a little blown away by it. But basically what it does is it looks at electroencephalographs and says, well, first of all, we're able now to, I guess, communicate with whales. I don't know if people know this, but we figured out whale language, and I guess figuring out how to talk to our dogs and cats and other things is next. But one of our researchers said, well, I've seen some stuff with music and EEGs and being able to tell like what music people's listening to. I wonder if we can do this with pictures. So we've done some work now where we've actually taken electroencephalographs and passed them through an AI model and then into a generative AI model that recreates the picture somebody's looking at. So somebody would be looking at a picture of a goldfish, Gen AI produces a picture of a goldfish. It has no idea other than the EEG input as a piece of data. And our researchers get so excited about this. You should see the glint in their eye when something like this sort of clicks and it works. And then they bring it to us and we say, that's incredible. The implications for something like that on product design or education, how do we apply that into our industries? So we do a lot of original R&D that our researchers, we kind of turn them loose a little bit. We're not exactly sure how it might be applied, but we really quickly say, can we use this to actually improve human condition and otherwise? And I think those pathways are really important. But if we didn't democratize the ability to be innovative in Accenture, I don't think we would have a chance of staying on top of some of the pace of change that's out there.
And I think along those lines, one of the things we're thinking about bringing back was the idea of this innovation grapevine, right?
Thank you for bringing up the innovation grapevine.
I'm teeing you up at it.
It's my favorite tool set. So
I mean, it was something we built years and years ago, but it's always like, there's probably a few degrees of hops between an idea that you have and someone who can connect it to, or a challenge that you have and someone who can connect it to the right idea. And so, how to use technology to democratize and make those connections between things.
Yeah, and the people aspect of this is so important. I mean, you brought this up, Chris, as well. And Steve Jobs, was a big proponent of this. He's like, he says, why is it that Apple, can invent a new product, and another company has an R&D budget 100 times of it. Of course, this is when Apple was this big, not the most valuable company in the world. And he says it all comes down to the people. He says, if you have the right people, I don't care how big your R&D budget is, you will come up with the most magical innovation on the planet. And part of that is the culture of innovation you create, the excitement, enthusiasm around it, the willingness to fail, and other pieces. So let me pause here for a second, see if anybody in our audience wants to ask a question of our panel or of me. Otherwise, you're going to hear me ask one more question myself. Anybody? Anyone? Bueller?
There's got to be a question out there.
Okay, all right. I will pick one more question from my list here.
Wait, I think there might be one.
So this is an interesting one. So we work in very competitive industries, each one of us, and there are, however, some things that kind of transcend being competitive. Like, where should we cooperate with our competitors, and where should we collaborate to create innovation? And I think it's incumbent upon us to solve some of these really big challenges in this way. Chris, you and I talked about this a little bit with sustainability, that maybe there's opportunities for you to work with some of your competitors in this space. What's the best way to think about that context? Is there an example that you have?
Yeah, so, electric vehicles obviously coming and becoming more and more of the car park, it really brings an emphasis on, well, what emissions are left on a vehicle.
Yeah.
And there's basically a couple, two worn parts. One's the brakes and one's tires. There's a lot of talk. What do those particles mean? And a problem that we've solved in the past, just go get better and better treadwear, still probably needs a better solution. And it's one that the whole industry needs. Now, you've said it, we're a competitive industry, so these things have to be very appropriate, but we have a really robust industry group.
Yeah.
And so we sponsor research together. And that research really looks at, these particles, what are they, where do they go, what could be the implications for them, and how do we do some work as a total industry to understand where is the innovation needed to go after this. So I think around those common problems are some really good ones. Now, obviously, delighting just customers on your routine things, you're going to do that more on our own. There are opportunities to do that if you're just simply trying to leverage common R&D expenditure. But I think of those problems that you just say to yourself, wow, as an industry, this has now emerged. We all have to get after this.
We
right?
do. Yeah,
and
for
an
the greater
industry group's a good way
exactly.
to do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I think we have a unique view across multiple industries and multiple clients in a given industry. So I think as we see some of these new technologies arise, we have an opportunity as Accenture to bring together and say, let's solve some of these foundational things sometimes around, on the ethics aspect of it, right? Gen AI, the biases, right? And, ensuring diversity. Think about those kind of things. Think about standards and how we drive those to create that baseline to then amplify a technology that's going to, boost everyone and it's.
The other thing I'll add, which is sort of like leaning on the industry, is we all have strong industry forums, but I do see with certainly with the Gen AI and other aspects, it's the notion that we're so much different in our industry than in your industry. Those barriers are breaking down.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's expanding even beyond our industry forums and looking at how a unique proposition in one industry that you may not think had any application, guess what it really does when you look at it undercover from close enough down. So it's really
It's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So I'll close this part on, I do think there's some common problems in our industry that it's incumbent upon us to work with our competitor, responsible AI frameworks, right?
Yeah.
This is just a greater good thing and something that we should do. Cybersecurity, the challenges with ransomware and others, what can we do to bond together and to share information? I know that our security group does a lot of that around sharing with some even, with other folks that are competitors and others, because it's the right thing to do. And I think that greater good needs to be woven into even our innovation capabilities as we think about how do we fix things going into the future.
Yeah.
All right, well, that was awesome, thank you. I want to just give you guys a couple of key takeaways from this. Set your bold goals, build for change, right? Mary and Chris both added around how important it is to have an innovation network and then it's connected. And let's come together to solve some of the world's greatest problems, because innovation is what's going to make the difference for us being leaders or followers. And I think that this esteemed crew is definitely on the leadership track. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the participation of our audience. Thanks, guys.